Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm very grateful to Tom and Matt and all the others who made it possible for me to come to the College of the Holy Cross and inviting me to speak as part of this first colloquium. I don't really feel I've done enough work in this area to merit this invitation, and what I have done has been confined largely to Goa in Western India. So in what I have to say here today, I will draw considerably on the work done by others in the field. I came to the study of lived Catholicism from a training in sociology and social anthropology. And for the most part, it is from this perspective that I speak today. In 1989, David Tracy wrote that we still await the Clifford Geertz to write Catholicism Observed in different cultures. I have drawn from his comment for the title of this presentation, in which I hope to provide some glimpses of what an observation and analysis of Catholic life in India might reveal to those interested in Catholicism and its scholarship in general. As in Lewis Carroll's work, from which I have drawn the other part of my title, it appears to me that the many worlds of Indian Catholicism render topsy-turvy some of Western scholarship's presumptions regarding the study of religion in general and Christianity in particular. Improvisation and ambiguity replace certainty and order. Big issues appear little, and similarities do not reduce to sameness. Yet at the same time, differences may not emerge as divides. The relationship between anthropology and Christianity in general has been fraught with difficulties. Anthropology claims the domain and the ethos of the secular, and persons with committed religious beliefs might find it hard to convince others in the discipline of their seriousness and impartiality. Indeed, some scholars hold that anthropology has an elective affinity with the idea and premises of secularism. It is thus not a surprise that Christianity was perhaps the last world religion to be taken as a significant object of study by anthropologists. The search for the exotic, as well as the ability to deal with beliefs, so long as these were the beliefs of somebody else, meant that tribal religions, Hinduism and Islam, could far more easily be accommodated within the scope of anthropological study than something as uncomfortably close and familiar as Christianity. In the process, the Christian foundation of many of sociology and anthropology's core concepts and ideas, including, ironically, that key idea of secularism, itself remained unquestioned and taken for granted. In India, the merging of Indological and anthropological discourses foregrounded Hinduism as the core religion to be studied. Indology provided the principle whereby the entire civilization was structured, and that principle was the twinning of caste with Hinduism. Caste was the major link bonding studies of anthropology with Indological texts. India was considered to be Hindu, and Hinduism was considered to be about caste. As Dumas would argue later, Homo hierarchicus stands in unique contrast and indeed opposition to the West, which is constituted by Homo equalus. Within this framework, Christianity could not be cast as a suitable object of study. It was from the West, it came from the West. What was there to study in it? It was akin to modernity itself. And where, in any case, was the great Indian tradition to which Christian studies could be linked? In fact, when Kaplan wrote his full-length study on Protestants in Chennai, that is in South India, in Tamil Nadu, how do I point to this thing? How do I point to this one? Yeah, so we'll be, this is in Chennai there. This kind of study, the kind of anthropological study that he did was still a novelty. And in fact, he records how he needed to justify his research to his own university in England. Of course, the change since then has been dramatic, and today we have many sophisticated analyses of both Catholic and Protestant communities in India, and some studies of new Christian movements as well. At the same time, and unlike in the West to an extent, it is probably true that when anthropologists in India studied religion, they usually study their own religion. This was certainly the case with Islam, with Christianity, and even with Hinduism. Were the implications of this positive for scholarship? Was it that Indian anthropologists were more comfortable with committed practitioners in their disciplines, or that the adherence to secularism itself is thin in the academy? Did studying one's own religion mean that an individual professed belief in it? These are some of the questions that Indian anthropologists and sociologists constantly ask themselves. But in the meantime, it should be noted that the situation is more elastic and altered today. This colloquium and the Catholic and Cultures venture both suggest that the question regarding how any religion, particularly Catholicism, can, in Bayer's words, be thought of or lived as a singular identity across the globe is being taken very seriously. In the rest of this presentation, therefore, I try to bring out 7 aspects that I think are interesting and important about Indian Christianity, Indian Catholicism in particular. 7 is a sacred and mystical number in the Catholic symbolic universe. The 7 aspects that are dwelt on here do not cover all facets of the study of Indian Catholicism, and indeed some are notably absent. At the same time, I consider that they are key to our understanding of what is different about lived Catholicism in a world of overlapping cultures and a plurality of religions. Difference without division. In 2005, Elizabeth McQueen suggested that Catholic studies has remained largely within the parameters of a Protestant Catholic imagination. And in an intensely plural world, it needs to move beyond this representation. Western Catholicism's history of Protestant movements and sectarian breakups prepares us for a construction of that religion in terms of grim ruptures and bleak separations. However, in India, even in a region such as Goa, that is in Western India, it's here. So we'll be dealing largely with Goa, with Tamil Nadu and Kerala in South India, and some of Matt's work, which is in UP. Those are largely the areas I'll be talking about today, but there may be others. Even in Goa, where conversion to Catholicism was backed by the Inquisition, and the regime was ordered by a strict repugnance of all indigenous substances, dissimilarities bring out diversity without necessarily appearing as hierarchical oppositions or as deep divisions. In Goan Catholicism, in Goa, Catholicism was largely confined to the districts touching the coast, where whole villages were converted to the new faith. Converts lived surrounded by Hindu districts, but they had, on a day-to-day intercourse, they had very little relationships with these Hindus. So at some level, social separateness was achieved, though cultural traditions remained alive. In terms of their substance, the signs and symbols of the Hindu and Christian religious calendars differed, but they were mapped out in structurally very similar ways. In the regional Hindu religio-agricultural calendar, the harvest festival is celebrated around the birth of Lord Ganesh, and the worship of Ganesh is performed by the head of the family, and the new paddy is offered to this deity. The harvest festival among Catholics, of which you find some glimpses here, show traces of continuity with indigenous traditions. The celebrations are usually centered around the feast of a particular saint, which happens to fall during the harvest season, that is August and September. The feast commences with a procession to the paddy fields, accompanied by the sounds of beating drums and the playing of music. The parish priest ritually cuts a few grains of corn, as you can see, and these are carried back to the church. And the ears of grain are placed in the arms of the saint in whose name the festival is being celebrated, just as they are placed before the image of Ganesh among the Hindus. So far from ignoring or denying the cultural similarities with their Hindu neighbors, Goan Catholics refer to their harvest feast, which is known as the Konsache Fest, because konas means grain. They refer to it as Amchi Gonsha, or our Ganesh. In another instance, the village of Kunkuli in Goa's Salsette district determinedly resisted conversion in the 16th century. Catholicism came to this village like a whirlwind, destroying temples and taking lives. When further struggle seemed hopeless, the icons of the destroyed temple of Kunkuli was secretly transported to the village of Hatorpa in an area that is south of Salsette that was not at the time under Portuguese rule. Here, a new temple to the deity Shantadurga was set up, and all the ceremonies were re-established. Every year, even till today, the image of Shantadurga is transported back to Catholic Kunkuli during the Hindu month of Falgun. Arti is performed, that is, worship is performed by a spot near where the killings had taken place during the temple's demolition in the 16th century. Two bands play during the celebrations, one a Hindu band and the other a Catholic band. Through the festival, links are maintained between the people of Kunkuli and the goddess Shantadurga, who is viewed as a powerful divine figure. Catholics often visit the temple of the goddess, particularly during her festival or her zatra, to ask for favors, that is success, birth of a child, and so on. In return, they make vows of donations of gifts or money. Throughout Goa, and in fact throughout this western region of the Konkan, people tell stories of the 7 sisters who were once represented by 7 temples in the region. The story goes on to say that some of the sisters converted to Catholicism, such as Our Lady of Cures at Kansauli and Our Lady of Miracles at Mapsa. These are cities, towns in Goa. The Shantadurga temple at Faturpa remained Hindu, but the tale of the 7 sisters provides the mythical justification for the participation of Catholics in this sacred world of the Hindus. While the Catholic Church regards itself as the sole source of power and grace, in Kunkuli, these are also seen as emanating from divine beings such as Shantadurga. There is a certain degree of defiance written into this transgression of sacred boundaries. The language of kinship binds Hindus and Catholics in sororal conjunction. The relationship with Western Catholicism, with its Protestant or even Islamic other, may cause it to be overly familiar with the structure and grammar of religious division. However, as Vishwanathan shows for Syrian Christianity in Kerala, in Goa too, the boundaries between the Catholics and the Hindus are at moments exceedingly blurred. Yet they do not also entirely disappear. Each group maintains its individuality within Goan society, aware of and accepting similarities and points of contact, as well as differences. I would argue that the more illuminating imagery may be that of Oberoi's frontier, a corridor which interconnects even as it separates, a zone of fluidity as well as of contestation. Decentering Catholicism. Different and particular discursive histories led both in the heart of the West as well as in India, scholars of theology, religious studies, and even anthropology to focus on what Catholicism took from the religions before and around it. Catholicism's self-absorbed understanding, as it were, of its own origins celebrates its capacity to incorporate elements of what existed before it, pre-Christian traditions and symbols, and to make them its own. However, in this image of Christ, this is from Andhra Pradesh, which was in South India. This is a folk fabric painting. You can see that Christ, I'm telling you, you can see it. It's not very clear, actually. Christ is actually depicted as Krishna, and this whole the whole fabric carries the story of Krishna, and you can just about glimpse here the cow. Krishna is associated with cattle rearing and so on, and all these little these are little bits of the stories of Krishna's birth and his life, and this image of Christ is in the middle of that. Of that whole that piece of fabric painting, and it's not very clear here whether Christ is the end, as it were, of a history of which Krishna is a part, or whether Christ is taken into a world in which he is just another being like Krishna. So whether it is Catholicism that takes from Hinduism, or Hinduism that has appropriated Catholicism within its symbolic universe is something that is a little ambiguous. Anyway, in relation to the colonies where Catholicism spread, this adaptive ability of Catholicism is stressed to show Catholicism's flexible adjustment to a range of cultures. Paradoxically, in India, the preoccupation with Hinduism meant that, similarly, when other communities are studied, they are first analyzed for what they received from Hinduism, whether this was caste in the first instance or forms of rituals such as life crisis rituals and the like. Morse's tantalizingly brief account of a Hindu goddess in South India, in Tamil Nadu, in an area where Catholicism has been around for some 3 centuries or so, gives a fascinating glimpse of the kind of intricate interweaving of traditions that could be revealed when one looks not at Hinduism lending or at Catholicism adapting, but at the complex and contradictory terrain of cultural interactions as a whole. As he shows, the Virgin is represented as having only benign, or what are considered in this South Indian region, cool powers. Sexuality and death are banished from her immaculate presence, crushed in the form of the serpent beneath her feet. Desire, power, and the capacity for unpredictability and evil are projected onto various Hindu goddesses within popular Catholicism of this region. However, Hindus also appear to attribute to the ordinarily violent local virgin goddesses some of the features associated with the benign Mary. At Aranmanakariya, there is a shrine to a Hindu virgin goddess. This goddess is known as childbirth chaste. Myths about the foundation of the shrine link the goddess to milk, which is a substance that is associated with coolness as well as with childbirth. Virgin goddesses within the Hindu tradition are known to be angered if approached by women in states of pollution, such as birth pollution or menstrual pollution. Unlike other virgin goddesses, though, the one here is like the Virgin Mary, and she remains apparently unaffected by and tolerant towards birth pollution. Her power is conceived of as benevolent, as indulgent and cool. Popular Catholicism may well have seeped over the centuries into the local Hindu cults of this region. What might be recollected is that in a plural context such as India, Catholicism is one among many religions. Any understanding of relationships across margins must be freed from a perspective that centers one religion and peripheralizes the other. It may make many Catholics uncomfortable to see how symbols and myths can leak across boundaries without any conversion, even nominal, taking place. Yet Morse's tale reminds us that access to the divine or to symbols of sacred power are hardly tightly controlled, either by priestly sanction or the assumed limits of community. Once one comprehends a world in which plurality confounds the possibility of neatly ordering center and margins, one may perceive how Catholicism and Hinduism may simultaneously impact on a third and different religious and cultural environment. This is what happened among some tribal communities in the northeast of India, for instance. Further, Catholicism may get Hindu ideas through the grid of Islam or vice versa. It appears to me that understanding these processes requires both complicating and historicizing them. The stickiness of the sacred. Though Durkheim employed the notion of the taboo to demarcate the sacred from the secular, he acknowledged that the sacred is a slippery thing. It cannot be easily contained. It attaches itself by contiguity or association to all manner of objects or even persons. The Catholic Church in India has engaged in a continuous process of conversion or civilizing, trying to wean adherents away from practices, rituals, and beliefs that are considered incompatible with Christian decency or the proper Christian life. In the case of tribal communities, for instance, priests seek to contain worship within the church. At the same time, it has been realized that without a degree of inculturation, communities chafe within the fold of the church. Thus, 2 processes have emerged. 1, the embedding of Christian ideas into practices and rituals considered non-Catholic, and 2, the unofficial permitting of rituals that take place outside the church and in the domestic sphere, by deeming them as belonging to the sphere of the mundane or the sphere of the ordinary. That is, they are merely cultural rather than religious. Thus, as Kujur shows in one of his studies, the local church has learned to acquiesce with aspects of tribal culture, such as the Chhati ceremony or the Karam festival. This is the festival or the ceremony of initiating a child, and the other is the harvest festival. Though baptisms are performed only within the church under priestly administration, the Chhati performed in the house is the initiation ritual of the child into the tribal community. The symbolic objects that are used, such as rice beer, symbolize life and prosperity. The winnowing fan represents the different clans of the village, and paddy is used for the divination of the name of the child. Such processes may ease integration for tribal communities, but they remain at the level of rituals, and they do not engage with traditional tribal beliefs. Even more challenging for the church is the enveloping world of sacred beings within which tribals live. For tribal communities in central India, for instance, the world of the sacred extends far beyond Christ or the saints. Beings both malevolent and benevolent, including village deities and ancestral spirits, extend their influence over people. They inhabit stones or rivers or parts of houses, and may even come to reside within certain individuals. The Catholic Church labels all these beings as forms of the devil or shaitan. Nevertheless, it remains one of the trickiest areas of Catholic negotiation. Froyer argues that the priests preach to the Oraon tribes of central India that they must choose between Jesus and these satanic beings. However, the Oraon are unable to understand Jesus as standing completely apart from their traditional divine beings. Rather, they have incorporated Jesus as the king of the gods within a divine hierarchy that includes an entire range of beings, both benign and malicious, numerous deities as well as ancestral spirits that might refuse the Oraon's security from ill health or bad luck if they are not honored from time to time. There is another aspect of the relationship between the secular and the sacred that we need to dwell on a little. In the South Asian context, and certainly in India, the church is not merely a closed religious institution or establishment with a well-defined clerical hierarchy and speaking with one voice on issues of spiritual concern. Collapsing the divide between the sacred and the secular, the church should be viewed more significantly as an arena and as a resource, real as well as symbolic. The church as arena is not mere metaphor. The example of the church of Vadakankulam in Tamil Nadu in South India, which spatially as well as in the terms of rights and privileges, became the battleground for caste wars between two castes called the Velalars and the Nadars, is well known, and indeed it is notorious. While such relations between church members are based on caste status, the ownership of land or control within the local panchayats, that is local bodies, political bodies, that is, this status is socio-economically or politically based. The church maintains and articulates these status positions. Honors, rights, and privileges in church ritual have importance in themselves and because they signify authority or stature in the community. They constitute as well as express social relationships and political authority. Structurally and even spatially, conversion usually involved the formation of a triangular field of influence between the church, the school, and the clinic. For converts from the so-called depressed classes or those born in the so-called lower castes, even when they did not have to relocate to mission land altogether, this relationship was crucial. It provided education, work, and livelihood, and was a source of self-esteem and sense of identity. Even from within, the church and its related institutions need to be understood as differentiated and contested spaces. They have been the context for discrimination as well as the reproduction of caste and social privilege. As Mose points out in a recent essay on Tamil Nadu, even for Dalits, or the so-called lowest castes in the caste hierarchy, Dalits within the clergy, the church maintains itself as a caste church with systemic and consequential prejudice, producing in effect discrimination as normal. It seems to me, if viewed as the center of relations of power and hierarchy within the community, the church is clearly not merely an agency of supernatural salvation. In the tumultuous context of caste struggles all over India, the relevance of the church will be measured in large part by its capacity to position itself as a vehicle of change, an active altering agent in the current social and political dynamics. Dualism tamed. The earlier point leads us directly to this point. It is apparent that one of the greatest difficulties for communities in the South Asian context is to divide the world, particularly the world of the sacred, sharply and unambiguously into good and evil, Christ versus Satan. In a village described by Mose, St. James is the patron of the village who guards his territory. This is a Catholic village. The Hindu deities of the village are subordinate to the authority of St. James. The god Munayar, the Hindu god Munayar, is represented as guarding the south door of St. James's church and as punishing those who make false oaths in the church. Munayar is in fact only playing a role he already plays for the Hindu village god Ayanar, that of a subordinate or guardian deity. Thus, while St. James is said to violently punish those who offend him, the active punitive role is assigned to the Hindu god, who is Munayar. Christian divinities retain pure and holy powers. The more violent ones are projected onto their Hindu divine subordinates. Nevertheless, Hindu gods and goddesses are not demonized. What really occurs is a split between benevolent and violent powers of the Christian deities. St. James derives his power from Christ and the Virgin, yet his power is more violent and more circumscribed than theirs. They are benign and their power is universal. His is more vengeful and his power is confined to the village. Munayar is said to enact punishment, but he is acting on behalf of St. James and in St. James's name. The reality of the world of these Catholics is one of shared social interaction with village Hindus, who are their neighbors and in some cases their kinsmen. They are bound together by social and economic ties, by relationships of patronage and clientship, and perhaps even kinship. Catholic images of their deities seem to acknowledge the continued relevance of shared interaction with Hindus and their social and divine worlds. At the same time, James is also said to be the saint of the forest. The forest is conceptualized as a world of chaos and disorder, outside of the realm of structured social life. In the forest, which is exterior to the village, Christian divinities are said to assume the aspects of complete purity and goodness. Evil is then taken on, in the forest, evil is taken on by ghosts, by spirits of the dead, and by Hindu divinities of the lower end of the pantheon. These are exorcised by St. James in his form as the saint of the forest. Thus, a radical divide is clearly difficult to achieve, and it obtains only when the world of the sacred is viewed outside the social and ritual context of the village. Morse feels that in the forest, Catholicism appears as a more universal faith and participates in the absolute division between good and evil that is obligated by its Catholic affiliation. I may point out, though, that nobody lives in the forest, and it is in the everyday world of religions embedded in intersecting social and ritual matrices that Catholics and the Church could learn, perhaps not just from observing God or a ray of truth in the other, but also understanding how that truth might challenge some of their own certainties. India has produced many theologies, the Brahmanical theology of Brahmabandha Dev Upadhyay or the Dalit theologies of today, and thinkers whose work remains marginal, though, or perhaps because, they have pushed the boundaries of canonical thought with particular reference to the relationship between Catholicism and other faiths. In Tracy's words again, the Catholic Church should move beyond to understanding how what once seemed merely other now seems a real possibility for the self. The centrality of Mary. The opposition between Mary and Eve in Catholic theological discourses brings out again the dualism between good and evil we have just spoken of. In the case of the feminine divine, this translates into a struggle between virginal purity and sexuality, fertility and power. Indian Catholicism sees the full flourishing of the feminine principle within the Catholic faith. Indeed, one may venture to argue that without Mary, Catholic devotion would be incomplete and commitment to the faith far feebler. At the same time, most Catholic communities disregard the fine doctrinal distinction between the worship and veneration of Mary and the saints. Moreover, by casting Mary, for the most part, in her maternal aspect as mother or as Mata, you can see that most of the images, at least, they are about the idea of the Mata. And this is the Our Lady of Good Health at Velankani, which is a very famous shrine where thousands of people go to make devotions. And this sari would actually be changed every day because this would be a gift given by one or other of the devotees. And they have so many thousands of them that even if they change it every day or twice a day, they won't run out of them. Moreover, by casting Mary, for the most part, in her maternal aspect as mother or as Mata, they suppress all reference to her virginity, a motif that is so critical in Catholic theological discourses. The Mata or mother is no longer in the way that she is venerated in India, is no longer fettered to her role as mediatrix between those who implore her and her divine Son. She is worshipped as a divine being in her own right. Our Lady of Velankani, for instance, as Bailey shows, is portrayed not just as a benign protector, but as a warrior and a conqueror. And the term Shakti, or power, is attributed to her supernatural qualities. Kalpana Ram, in her study, seems to suggest that the possibility of the sacred dualism between the pure and the evil may be achieved through the attribution of the evil qualities of Hindu goddesses to Hindu divine divinities, while the Mata is ascribed only redemptive and benign healing powers. What is symbolized, therefore, also partakes of wider South Asian notions regarding the opposition of a good woman and the bad woman. In her ethnography of Mukkuvar fisherfolk in Tamil Nadu in South India, Ram perceives a split in the conception of the feminine divine in their popular Catholicism. Among the fishing community of that region, good and evil are symbolized and incarnated by the figures of Mary on the one hand and the local goddess Isiki on the other, who represents the evil powers. Mary is seen as the completely benevolent Mata, and the unruly aspects of femininity, such as desire or power and the capacity for evil and unpredictability, are projected onto the figure of the Hindu goddess Isiki. At the same time, I would like to suggest that the presence of the figure of Isiki in this Catholic popular devotion testifies to the need to contend with and to represent the disorderly aspects of the feminine, which are denied by the figure of the eternally placid Mary of the official Catholic discourses. The importance of the body. These are also images to show the importance of Mary. This is in Tuticorin in Tamil Nadu. This is a very famous Our Lady of Snows, this pilgrimage and devotion, which is this golden chariot where you can see the church, and these flags are put up at the beginning of the festival, which is a three-day festival. Once the flags are hoisted, then this is a whole sacred space in which sexuality and evil are forbidden throughout this area that is covered by the reign, as it were, of Our Lady of Tuticorin. And then she's taken out in this golden chariot. Anyway, to move ahead. The importance of the body in Indian Catholicism. In The Repugnant Cultural Other Speaks Back, Brian Howell argues that for the Baptists of the Philippine city of Baguio, Christian identity was understood more in terms of commitment than in terms solely of belief. In most non-Western cultures, including India, the idea of belief, if understood as enduring and internalized convictions regarding a consistent set of religious propositions, becomes somewhat problematic. At the same time, the idea of belief is not completely absent. It may well be more situational or the result of a voluntary act, the will to believe, as it were. And that is associated with certain performative powers. In other words, as Kirsch argues, believing means acting. To this, I may add that belief is not abstract, but concretized and material. It is crucially embodied. Belief in the Indian Catholic context is experienced by the body, whether it is in the wearing of crucifixes, as you can see, and rosaries and images which are bought and touched again and again and again. These remain close to the body. The kissing of the feet of statues or the saints or Mary or Jesus, or drinking and applying to the body for healing purposes water that has been used to wash such images. Belief is contextualized in terms of its efficacy for the material aspects of life and well-being. These material aspects of life and well-being include many interrelated things, such as the health of body and mind. And recalling, the image that Tom had shown, this is from, you can see this. This is at Mount Mary Shrine in Bombay, and you can see these are wax candles that are made and sold, and that people buy and offer in the church during the Feast of Mount Mary. You can see the things that they want, like houses and children, and limbs and so on, and marriage, that is married couples, and so teeth and things like that. Very, very material images of well-being, and so on. It is the fulfillment of physical, educational, and occupational needs, or the protection from forms of oppression and degradation. This is what belief and the concretization of belief consists of. So entangled are the worlds of the spirit and the body that illness, accidents, or misfortune are understood as the work of possession by one or other of a variety of divine beings or the ghosts of dead ancestors. These spirits are viewed as intervening actively in people's lives and causing, in many cases, physical illness and affliction. Healing of the mind and body then, or the reversal of fortunes, can occur only through the intervention of a superior divinity or through the honoring of the possessing spirit. Morality and sinfulness, reward and punishment, providence and misfortune are not merely intangible notions located solely within a framework of salvation. They are the real outcomes of the actions of divine beings, which engage and implicate persons and their bodies and their lives in this world. Sometimes the punitive and evil powers that bring misfortune, evil, and illness through possession are assigned to Hindu gods and goddesses, and sometimes these are assigned to Christian saints, though never to Christ or Mary. In several cases, the narratives of possession reveal ruptures in kin and community relationships that the healing process must also address. The spiritual struggles of good and evil are experienced on the terrain of Indian Catholicism in immediate and this-worldly form, as battles of exorcism, wherein wickedness or conflict rage through the possessed body and must be physically expelled or ritually and socially contained. Despite its ideas of the resurrection of the body, Catholicism disdains the flesh, sexuality, and even relations of consanguinity and kinship. It focuses its gaze firmly on the spirit, on the other world, and on the universal community of believers. Yet the very idea that the divide between spirit and flesh and the primacy of the first over the second are universal concepts is contradicted by ethnographic accounts from everywhere, and certainly from India. This means, to paraphrase Howell, that if we are to take the subject position of the Indian Catholic as a fully formed standpoint, we must refocus the conversation on the embodied, lived, and relational aspects of religion, not as incidental or merely cultural manifestations, but as central to the Catholic identity itself. The plurality of texts. The preceding discussions have drawn us into understanding the complexities of the relationship between text and context. These also make us all too aware of the fact that we cannot take it for granted that the Catholic faith, wherever it is found around the world, is text-centered or text-circumscribed, that text being, of course, the Bible. Matt here has analyzed stories, couplets, and aphorisms through which Dalit or ex-untouchable, as it were, Catholics contest both their location as a marginal and stigmatized community and distill their own understanding of themselves as Isai or Christian. The universal power of the word takes on a whole different meaning when quotations from the Bible itself are inscribed on mud walls and the seeker achieves, to quote, a textualized identity that is wholly contextual. In many Indian Catholic communities, for instance, the influence of the ancestors may be assimilated with the power of God or of Jesus Christ through ritual practices that are tied at once into the domains of kinship, descent, and spirituality, without, as Torren puts it in her analysis of Fijian Christianity, explicit acknowledgement in any church service or Christian prayer or Bible story of the continuing existence of ancestors. In particular, the axis of misfortune and healing tends to lie at the heart of this dialogue in different communities. Stories, myths, folk tales, local theologies, folk music, rituals and performances, forms of devotion to popular saints, and even the sounds of the drum have been written about by a number of scholars as being crucial to the making of the lived vernacular Catholic identity in different parts of India. If we were to employ the metaphor of culture as text, as Geertz puts it, it is to this ensemble of textual practices that we must pay closer attention. In conclusion, the establishment of this new initiative by the Center clearly implies that the global practice of Catholicism cannot be taken for granted as something transparent or interpretable by universal theories. In the context of India, certainly, conversion to Catholicism may not be that single transformative event and may not indeed be considered irreversible or exclusive. Catholicism may be viewed as new or just as a local religion competing with other local religions within the shared space of the sacred. The priorities and commitments, the beliefs and the practices, the forms of faith and ritual of varied Catholic communities may differ significantly. Further, they construct their own mythologies and histories steeped in local color, their own sense of themselves in their regions and in the world, their own particular identities. Taken forward, the themes I have raised may help in a small way in understanding how Indian Catholic communities construct themselves and how this changes the ways in which we think about global Catholicism, about the nature of faith, as well as, more broadly, the modern study of religion. In the end, what these themes could contribute to Catholic studies scholarship will depend crucially on the questions we are prepared to put to ourselves about what it means to be Catholic in different and distinct parts of the globe. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Tom first for gathering us all together this afternoon. I'd also like to acknowledge Father McFarland and thank him for his generous support of this initiative, and thank you all for your presence here this afternoon. For me, it's a particularly wonderful opportunity to actually meet Rowena Robinson in person and welcome her here to Holy Cross. And Rowena's research has been central to the growing scholarship on Indian Christianity. But as Rowena pithily observed in one of her recent books, the scholarly approach to Indian Christianity has usually been to examine Christians in India as opposed to Christians of India. One approach sees Christians as foreign transplants, kind of parachuted in by the Pope or something like that. The other sees Christians, particularly as Catholics, shaping and being shaped by Indian cultural and social dynamics. And so in her talk, Rowena gave us a framework for understanding how studying Catholics of India relates to broader issues within the study of global Catholicism. And so, with your permission, what I'd like to do is to take the 7 major points that Rowena makes and use them as a frame to introduce a single Indian Catholic life. And it's my hope that such a brief introduction, brief overview, if you will, might help us to understand more about the specific implications of Rowena's observations, and also let us reflect upon what being Catholic can mean in India. Rowena had a much better map than I do, but obviously, as you know, India is a vast and diverse nation, and depending upon how you count the numbers, which is always a contentious issue within India, Catholics number around 15 million people. And most Catholics are a significant part of the population of South Indian states, as Rowena mentioned, down here, particularly in Goa, where Rowena did her research, Kerala, and also Tamil Nadu and some in Karnataka as well. But I'd like you to travel with me to an area in North India, in the Hindu-Muslim heartland, where Catholics are a very tiny minority up here, less than 0.5% of the local population. Specifically, I'll be talking about the eastern area of Uttar Pradesh, right here, where I lived off and on for 4 years and did my dissertation research 15 years ago. And so what I'd like to do is to introduce you to this woman, Kamla, a Catholic convert who lives in a small village near the Ganges River in eastern Uttar Pradesh. Kamla's life most obviously speaks to the importance of the body, which Rowena emphasized in her talk. You see, Kamla was born an untouchable, for lack of a better term. The way in which untouchability is spoken about in India has changed a lot in recent years. For our purposes, though, we'll just use the word untouchable, because she was considered to be so impure that she could literally not be touched by the higher social classes of her village. And part of the reason for this low status was her birth in the Chamar caste, a caste that by necessity ate carrion and was required to remove dead cattle, for which they would be remunerated by allowing to skin the cattle and make sandals. And because this occupation was associated with death and impurity, Kamla and members of her caste were ostracized and outcast from the social hierarchy. And Kamla never, of course, had land of her own and certainly never learned how to read and write. And so from a very young age, she worked the fields of the local landowners and received the standard remuneration, which was 1 bundle of wheat for every 18 that she gathered. And because in rural Indian culture in the north, childbirth is a time associated with great impurity, Kamla, as well as other women of her caste, served as midwives and tended to women before or after birth and cleaned them and so forth. And so when I took this picture of Kamla about 12 years ago, she was about as old as I am now, about late 40s. So a very hard life she has lived. And so when a Catholic mission was established near Kamla's village by Canadian Capuchins, She didn't really think very much of it, even when the Catholic mission passed into the hands of an indigenous Indian religious order, the Indian Missionary Society. And Kamala did not think, as some others did, for example, that her bodily identity, her status as an untouchable, could be removed. But she did take notice that the mission had a medical dispensary that provided free treatment. And so when her son, Prabhunath, was born, he developed a high fever. And since she had no other place to go, she took him to the local Catholic mission. And so there at the local Catholic mission, while her son was being treated, she went to a nearby shrine to the Virgin Mary. And I don't have a picture of the shrine, but it was based upon this image, which Rowena also showed us, Our Lady of Valankani, Our Lady of Good Health. And so Kamala made a vow to the Virgin Mary. She would become Catholic if her son was cured from the fever. And, of course, for Kamala, being Catholic meant becoming a devotee of Mary. And so, as Rowena observed in her remarks, the importance of Mary in Indian Catholicism cannot be underestimated. And in Kamala's case, at least initially, Mary was a supernatural entity that existed alongside other female divine or semi-divine beings, particularly Shitalama, the goddess of smallpox, whose presence was always marked by a strong fever. And so in many ways, the curing of Kamala's son was understood to be the Virgin Mary's triumph over Shitala. And so through Mary's intercession, when Kamala's son was healed, they both